I'm not going to do a show introduction because it's not what this is. This is just you and me talking. So I think the way we'll get it started is just tell me who you are and about what you do.
Yeah, hi, my name is Amanda Havard. I am a founding partner of Innovation Engine, which is a strategy and innovation partnership consultancy. We work very closely with all types of different organizations, from giant orgs to startups that don't technically exist yet, to really help them get ideas in motion and see the impacts they're looking for in a project.
Awesome. Yeah, I know we've recently worked on a project together, and so I got to see some of that play out, and I'm excited to kind of talk about the different steps of that and the way you operate. But before we kind of get into any kind of like project stuff, what's your superpower? Like, what do you do? What are you great at?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's one that I ask everyone and like workshops on it, and still sometimes struggle with myself. But I think what I usually say is that my greatest superpower is focus, which is not the same thing as getting to focus all the time. But
Mhm.
if I can, I have that ability to, sometimes I talk about attention being like throwing a rock into or across the water. Like you could skip and be shallow. The people who can go real deep and stay deep. I do very well with that. Then again, if you have to come out a lot, really not so effective.
Mhm.
But if I can get there, I love to be able to sort of immerse myself in a story or the problem or the project or an idea and just live in it. And when I can do that, it's kind of crazy what I can get done.
Yeah, well, just I think that's to hear you say that. I think a great segue is to maybe talk about the What Could BGB project, maybe a little bit on how your superpower applied to that project so people can kind of understand how that worked on sort of a project basis.
Yeah, well, and to your point, we got to work on that together, which was so much fun,
Mhm.
especially having all you guys creatives in the mix. So yeah, the What Could Be GB project started as many things do when clients come to us as an innovation engine. It's like, here's an ambitious idea that we don't even have all the way figured out, right? Like that's the right time to come. If you figured it out, you probably don't need us. So in this case, there was Jigsaw, which is a division of Google. They came and they had a desire to test some AI-based tools that they call sense-making tools for really trying to evaluate the any possible way to get insight into an open dialogue, really, or a public discourse. And they had partnered with a an open source platform called Polis, and that idea was they had done Polis had done different deliberations, they call them, all over the world. They'd done a very small one years ago here in Bowling Green, but this partnership with Google really meant that they wanted to test their tools in an American city. And so they ended up picking Bowling Green and working with us, and then by extension, all of you. Why that was particularly important, no, how that was particularly relevant to what we're talking about here
Mhm.
is that, I mean, they came with, we're thinking about doing a public deliberation in an American city. We'd like to come talk to you guys because we hear that you have a lot of stakeholders already aligned on this BG 2050 project, which was a 25-year forward looking proactive planning process for the town. Um, Maybe we could get some ideas from you. Like that's how fuzzy it was when it started. And then when they got here, it became, well, you already have a lot of the pieces in place. Well, how would we market something like this? I'm like, that's a great question. First, we would have to make it make sense to people, right? Like, what even is this? And so, what started as something that fuzzy became like 7 months of work with, I mean, half a dozen plus creative agencies, dozens of subcontractors through town, over 100 volunteers for BG 2050 listening partners, and in the end, 8,000 people participating in a public deliberation without us ever saying the words public
Yeah,
deliberation, right?
yeah,
And so that ability to sort of live inside it and think through what our stakeholders need, what does our leadership need, who are our personas in the community that we're trying to reach, what's their perspective going to be on this, how would we then get them to participate and make sure they feel heard? What is the opposition going to look like? How do we keep this from turning into a PR, chaos? There's so many moving parts of it, but you could stay deeply embedded in it. A lot of good could come from it.
yeah. Man, there's so many things I could talk about just from that one line of thought. I know we were involved on the creative, I'd say, development side of that with all the other agencies in town and with you kind of leading the way there. And then we were involved a little bit on the back end, seeing some of the data kind of coming in and what was and wasn't working. Hearing you talk about the fuzziness of the idea, I think about, kind of taking a step back. I think about creativity like as a whole is really taking those fuzzy ideas and turning them into something tangible, right? And I think that project and the way that you approached it, I got to see that at a scale that I hadn't seen before. Because, most of our projects, one-on-one client, usually what they're asking for is pretty straightforward, but does need some massaging sometime. But to see the way that you approached it from a holistic perspective, I think really helped our team understand that whole process when you're working with someone on an idea as fuzzy as we didn't even have the name of what it was. And we came up with the name of what could BGB in that. And I think that process of letting the creative people explore the creativity to figure out what that thing was is valuable in and of itself to a company. And so I don't know, maybe if you want to speak on that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean that you're hitting the nail on the head, and that was one of the gifts of the project was with our partnership and generosity from Jigsaw Google. We knew that this was not quick um, a quick process, right? You couldn't be like, here's a brief and give us a plan, right?
Right.
And what was important to us is that as an innovation engine team and as Jigsaw's team was to work with creatives and let them do what creatives do. And we've talked about this since for a long time now and here in this community, which is if we believe that the time to invite a creative to the discussion is after you've figured it out, like, what are you doing, right? At that point, like, find a student who's looking to build a portfolio and tell them what you want if you're convinced that's the thing you need, right? So it was really great for us to get to bring all of you guys into the room because the reality is really strong creatives are really strong strategists, right? And so if it is someone's trying to say, this is what I'm trying to communicate, or even this is what I hope people feel at the end, right? Which even then they don't articulate it. We usually to help them articulate it. I want people to feel like they've been seen and heard, like there's a reason they did this. That even if the tech doesn't tell us anything, which it did, thankfully, but even if it doesn't, this helped our community, and it felt like they were a part of something, and they had a chance to be heard. And you know, that level of okay, that's where we started, right? It wasn't here's a brand guide, we want a 15-second clip, it's going to be a commercial, and it needs to do this, right? Those are very different things, you know, and so I've been very happy to hear that you guys, and of course others of our partners around town, are doing more of that early strategy and advisory work to help figure out what needs to get done, right? Famously in my career, and sometimes with not the nicest way of handling it, sometimes I'm like, yeah, how do you know that's what you need to build, right? Like,
Right.
how do you know that's what you need to make, you know? And
Right.
where you and I are different is until now, most of my entrepreneurial work has been in startups. We're building products. And so, you know, what happens with me is people come to me all the time. They're like, oh, I've got an idea for an app. And the very first thing I say every time is, how do you know it needs to be an app? They're like,
Hmm.
no, no, hear me out. I've got an idea for an app. I'm like, but like, how do you know? Right. And also famously, people say, hey, I want to hire you or any dev team, if nothing with me, you know, how much does it cost to build an app? I'm like, how much does it cost to build a house? They're like, well, that depends. I'm like, on, and they're like,
Hmm.
how big it is, nice it is, where it is. I'm like, exactly. Right.
Exactly.
And so when you think about the people who are going to design and do things that like reach your ultimately your customer, your stakeholder, they need to be up at that process because like you and I are trained to help people answer those questions so we build the right thing, right? And so
Oh
the right
yeah.
thing gets made.
Oh yeah, 100%. I mean, everything that you just said could apply to my world, which traditionally has been video. Like honestly, my entire career up until the last, I would say, year and a half, it's been very much that. We think we need a video. We want video to look X way. We're going to hire you to come in, execute video. Well, as we were going through that process, just because my business partner and I are creative people, we're like, well, hold on. who are we aiming for? What are we trying to get them to do? What does this video need to look like? Have you even thought about this factor, this factor, this factor? And that was kind of the, I would say, having that veil pulled back on our eyes a year and a half ago when we really started to take a step back and ask ourselves those questions of like, well, we're really helping people solve a problem. It's video is just the tool to get there. Yeah, we know how to execute any type of video at any scale, but what we really were good at was the talking people through that and figuring that out. And so to your point now, it's like we have shifted our attention away from, hey, we're a video company to, hey, we want to know who is your audience, what pain point do they have, and does your product or your service actually solve that problem? If it does, well, then how are we getting the message of how that solves that problem in front of the people that actually need that problem solved? And so that's where we've started to shift our attention to. And then all of the design, all of the imagery, the tone, everything else is downstream of those decisions. And ultimately, the strategy informs those decisions. And so I think I'll reiterate again is like seeing that in action in the What Could BGB campaign was like an affirmation to us of, oh, we are thinking about this in the right way. We're working with people who are also thinking about it in the right way. It's just we're all trying to figure out how do we best help our client in that way. And so it was so cool to see that and just really kind of validate, oh, we do know what we're doing. We've just seen it kind of formulated in another way.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you framing it that way. And I think it was validating for me, just, that like you and I met, I mean, multiple times through here at the Innovation Campus, but even through that Community Creative Council, where, a really good example of this, we do this to ourselves sometimes, was that if you asked like what some people either in the room or outside the room who asked us to come to the room, what the problem was, like, well, we don't have enough creatives here. It was like, I bet that's not it, right? Like, just, I don't mean to be callous about it. It sounds funny when I exaggerate it. And then in the room, it was, well, people hire out of town agencies when they have big work. And I was like, bet that's not it either. Like, bet it's that you're not in the process early enough, right? And so, and you've lived this, right? And you and Boo have done such a great job, like making that shift. And excited to see you do more of it. But it's like, don't call a video company when you think you need a video. Call creatives when you need to figure out what to communicate. Like,
Right.
call creatives when you need to figure out what you're even trying to do. And I say creative is a big word, right? Here, I use it as a big word, all-encompassing term. Because, like, for Innovation Engine, we would say the same for innovators. And there's a lot of overlap, right? It's, we have a 6-gear model because we talk about the engine, famously. Actually, I don't know if you've ever heard this part of the Innovation Engine story.
No, I
Is
haven't.
people will come in and go, I want you to fix this, right? So Amanda, come fix this reporting issue in a tech stack, right? To you, Andrew, I have a whole grand plan for my business. Come make me a video, right? And you're like, but back up, for who? And they're like, don't worry about that. We already figured that out. And I'm like, okay, then tell me. No, don't worry about that. Well, for us, what would happen is they'd be like, we don't want to talk about the tech stack. We want to talk about our billing process. I'm making this one up. I'd be like, okay, how does that work? They walk through it. I'm like, okay, so then how do you get that information from so-and-so to put in the system to make it happen?
That's right.
That we don't want to talk about that. And I'm like, okay, they're gears, right? See how you turn this gear and it moves this gear and it moves this gear? That's what we're talking about. And so for innovation and Innovation Engine's model, we have the 6 gears of innovation because someone will come to us with like, I got a plan, implement it. We're like, that is not a plan. And I don't even know if it's the right one, right?
Yeah.
And so our first of the 6 gears is imagination. Like, how weird it is to be running like a mostly tech-oriented firm that we're like, so let's start with imagining. But it's the idea, right? Like, and it's kind of what you guys get to do when you're like, back up. What are you hoping for? Well, I hope people realize we're the most trustworthy fill in the blank business because X and Y. Okay, let's talk about how we're going to make that happen.
That's right.
And so I think that's a lot of the, getting involved earlier in the process, and then helping people imagine what they really want, and then calling the right people for the job. Right? Like, I don't know how you run your company, and I don't know how you, perfectly source the right materials for your concrete company. but
Uh-huh.
I can help you figure out this very intense problem, or I can help you figure out how this problem affects other things, or how to think through communicating a message internally, externally. But those things we get into these boxes. We'll say, that's marketing. And I'm like, is it? That's, well, that's not you because that's marketing. And I'm like, well, I'm building a product. Yes, but they're selling the product. I'm like, should perhaps those touch one another? Right? I
That's
mean, it's this, there aren't these big silos that people have thought about like there used to be, you know?
You're so right, and it's like we had a request maybe a year ago. Someone knew that we did video. They reached out to us via recommendation, and it was a person who was technically like head of communications of that company. When I met with her several times to try to get to the bottom of what she was actually trying to do, I was trying to do a whole marketing campaign. And I
Right.
said, if this is your goal, these are probably the stakeholders that need to be involved. These are probably the conversations we need to have. And after we got down that road, she actually thanked us. She's like, you guys showed me that what I was trying to do, I actually am not allowed to do because I'm supposed to stay in my communications lane. And
Right.
so I think that what that made me think about hearing you talk about, a lot of times those companies, or I should say an individual at a company that has a perception of a problem and a perception of the solution to that problem, how can we help that person maybe ask the right questions or be primed to think about it the way that we do so that we can show that, hey, we're actually trying to help you. We're not trying to push you over here to do what we want to do. Like we're actually trying to help you. Like how would you get that person primed, I guess, if that's the right way of asking that?
I mean, I got to give you a lot of credit. You already said the key thing: ask the right questions. And right implies wrong, which is not a thing, right? But I mean, this is so funny. This is one of my other superpowers is finding inspiration from the most random places.
Yeah.
In fact, I don't know. You see all the stuff behind me. I don't know if
Yeah,
you've
it's
ever
awesome.
seen these. These are my mood boards that started for the office, and
Yep.
it's like there's everything from like lists of like Forbes 400, or sorry, Fortune 500 stuff to stories of mental health to like weird art and like Vogue magazine spreads. And so to this exact point, I was reading the like intro letter on a restoration hardware, now RH catalog this weekend because I'm an aesthetics nerd. So just like seeing cool visuals.
Yeah.
And it was quoting Plato. So,
Oh
right?
yeah.
Over
Okay.
2000 years ago,
Yep.
as saying like essentially like I'm going to butcher this, but the paraphrase was like all creativity and collaboration doesn't come from answers, it comes from the right questions,
Yep.
right? And it's so when you're that person who doesn't think either just because they lack the experience only of like, oh, I didn't know what I was trying to do as an end-to-end marketing campaign, or they've been asked to operate in a silo, like the example you just gave, then one, I think you can do exactly what you did, which is start asking questions that help them ask better questions, right?
Uh-huh.
And ideally, you hope that it's not, we're like, oh, I can't even do my cool idea.
Yeah.
Ideally, it's like, oh, maybe it's a bigger undertaking than I thought. Let's loop the other affected people, interlocking gears, like right, to the conversation. So you can ask better questions or help them ask better questions. And really, like our imagination gear is also just ask them. Like, don't assume you know anything. Pretend for a second we know nothing. Sky's the limit. This is what we did with BG 2050. It was
Uh-huh.
imagine what your community is going to look like in 25 years. Start there. And if you're not careful, that comes into, well, it's probably going to do this and it's probably going to be worse because of this. You're like, no, 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 we don't do that. What could it be? Like in its most ideal form. And when you start getting to think that way, like in that example, like I don't think you said what industry that was. Maybe you did, but
Healthcare.
oh, even more, right? Because that's my sweet spot,
Hmm.
despite everything I just said. But
Yeah.
it's hard, right? Because if you're like, I just wish it were, and if you finally get someone to say the "wish it were" statement, you can pull at like what your like where do you need to dig, right, or who needs to get brought in. The other thing is that for me, I have yet to find a project, big or small, where I didn't find it beneficial to employ a human-centered design approach.
Mhm.
And while forever and ever that was limited to product design, or we get more and more of that on user journey, marketing journey, customer
Sure.
journey. Um, but just really like, who is that person you're trying to reach? Because the other thing I find, and I'm curious if you guys have this experience, is when someone comes with the sort of baked solution in their mind and you say to them, who are you trying to reach? They're like, I don't understand the question.
Yep.
Just make me this thing. I'm like, but who are you trying to reach? And even then, it'll be, okay, this kind of customer, you can walk them down an ideal customer, you know, journey,
Yep.
whatever. And then like, and now I want to put this on LinkedIn. I was like, are your customers on LinkedIn? Right? Like, let's go back to that. So who was on LinkedIn that you want to reach? Now let's answer this question differently. Right? So I think getting people to sort of go back and always go, who are you trying to reach? Who are you hoping walks away with that feeling about your business or about this project? And then really lean into that, because it helps people start realizing, I guess, think when you can give people that framing, and that's where you're like a true like creative and strategy partner, they start being like, oh, like you watch them be like,
Yeah.
okay, so if that's true, then you're like, yes, right? And then, that's when the good stuff starts rolling.
Yeah, totally. There are two things that hit my mind when I think about when we're starting to have these conversations now. Let's say it's a business that reach out to us for video and we get an in-person meeting or something. There's kind of two things I do now with those meetings. And this has been relatively new, and I didn't come up with this. This was from somebody else that gave this to me. But one was I come at it from more of a diagnostics perspective now. So, you know, so everything you just said, what's the point? And we could take that, we could layer that and take that granular however we want. But then also a really interesting question framing is, what does success 6 months from now? What does success look like?
Absolutely.
And so that phrase I've noticed has made people stop and be like, because for us in our world, most people, it's if it exists. If video exists, that's a win. And here's where we're like, I'm going to be 3 times more expensive than anybody else you're going to ask. And there's a reason for it. But if to you a win is it existing, my price will never make sense to you, which is why now we shift to everything that we're talking about. And I think, and some of the research I've done with you and the different things we've been a part of, and hearing that human-centered design is like we try to focus on that now. Like, and I don't call it that. I call it, I would say more of the diagnostic side, but it is really about trying to understand people and what their problems are and how to alleviate that with a product or service. And then our job is just to
Right.
bring that to life and put that in front of people. And so, yeah, everything you're saying, I think there's so much overlap between how you do it at Innovation Engine and probably the other companies you've worked with and how we're doing
Yeah.
it in the lane that we're kind of staying in now.
Well, and I think something that is resonating with me as you're describing this is you're almost reflecting back to me how I got to where I am. In that
Hmm.
I had my own idea for my own company, my own startup. That was step one. And then step two was got brought in as a co-founder. And I was like, oh, well, here's what we learned at the last one that worked really well with our human-centered design approach. Here's what did not work so well.
Yeah.
Well, okay, when that worked or didn't, when that investment was successful or failed, right? I could start going, oh, let's do a postmortem. What worked, what didn't?
Uh,
And in figuring that out, like I had a company that was the largest investment series that I ever had, that failed. And it was, I mean, blood, sweat, tears, 4.5 years of my life. And what kills me to this day is that the problem costs the country tens of billions of dollars every year in public money, and it is still not solved. And so you go, Amanda, did your tech not work? Nope,
mm,
tech worked quite well. The fallout in this example was the sales cycle. Like
uh,
how long it took people, because we were selling to government contractors who moved at the speed of a set government calendar that was a multi year contracting period. Then I'm a startup even if you want my service and I've got the messaging right and the tech works, then the sheer just the physics of that ecosystem, if you will, right? Um, or the physics of that universe
Totally.
is what made it fail. And so
Totally.
because of that, when you're talking about do you have that right product or service, right? Well, then even though you've come from creative to moving upstream to why is this the right creative? Really, who are you trying to reach in the first place? You can see how that starts to very quickly become, well, are you even selling the right thing?
That's right. That's exactly
Right?
right. That's exactly
And
right.
sometimes it's you're selling the right thing, but you're messaging it wrong.
Yep.
Sometimes you are selling the wrong thing,
Mhm.
right? And, increasingly, like, I've got my part of my job is the entrepreneur in residence here at the innovation campus. It's so frequent someone comes in and I'm like, great, what's the problem? And they've been coached on that. Here's the solution. Why you? Why now? I'm like, great. Who has a financial interest in solving this problem?
Yep.
And it's so often that's the rift. And it doesn't mean they hadn't thought through a business model, but they're like users. I'm like, will they? Like,
Mhm.
no, but maybe their employer will. Okay, so your user, or in your case, your audience, your viewer, right?
Mhm.
Maybe that's this type of individual, but who you have to sell to is their employer, right? And it's some of those things where I mean, what the same exact tools that we use for creative processes, they like again, like what could BGB and other things, all start blending together, right?
Yep.
Now we're like, is it even the right thing? Are you even charging the right amount? Does
Mhm.
that even make sense to that person you're trying to reach? How do you know? Okay, now you're in competitive landscape. What is the value proposition? What would the ROI be? Like
Yep.
suddenly just to talk about a thing, if you'll really dig, you get all the way into what is the thing? Is it the right thing? What thing should we build? So that's how bizarrely like running a marketing campaign also overlaps so heavily with launch a startup from scratch or completely not rebrand a business, but like rebuild the engine of that business, you know?
100%. The way you just worded that, that's actually what our company is doing right now. Is we know that video is effective. The way that we have our history said that we do it has its limits, and so now we're repackaging it as a way with some added layers of technology. A lot of the stuff we worked on the What Could BGB campaign, and using that as a way to put in front of companies now of like, here, this is actually a prepackaged tool to help your business grow, and it has trackable ROI, so you know if it's worth it or not. So we added the value prop for us has been, there's this sort of high level video content that costs a whole bunch of money, and then there's the entry level, and there's a huge gap in between. If there's a way to get that gap in between, package that to where it could be used with a company, and then now their content that's selling their product or service is messaged right and looks better than the entry level content that a straight out of college student person can do, and it's messaged the right way, then that's a value prop because it's driving ROI and we're tracking everything. It's like what you're saying in terms of you had the way you think your product works or your service works. It makes sense to you, but when you start to walk that back and kind of unweave your sort of presumptions about how it actually solved that problem, when you take that step back, you're like, actually, it doesn't really solve that problem this way, but it could this way if we
Right.
repackaged it this way. Because the thing in of itself is useful, but the way that we're using it to help people wasn't. And that can be a hard pill to swallow because it's like, for me and Booba, we were a passion first company. We loved the medium of making video. It was a passion. We're storytellers. And we figured the business stuff out as we've gone. And so we had to like, kind of swallow that pill and be like, look, we gotta walk some of this back and rethink how we can actually help people. And we're already starting to see, just like the conversation we're having now about like, well, what is that problem we're actually solving for that business? Does video actually solve that problem? Maybe their problem is their product or service that no amount of video or marketing or salespeople is going to solve. And so I definitely resonate with what you're saying because we're going through that right now as a company, and it's exciting, and it's I mean, somewhat terrifying, but it's needed because we want to be able to help people and we have to do it the right way. And I think every
Well,
company has to think about that.
they do. And, I say it was hard for you because you started as passion first, but I think you're still there, right? It's just that
Mhm.
the more you've uncovered, the more that you're going, oh, there's more to this. And it helps you refine that passion into, well, care about helping people, right? Increasingly I say, I care about good ideas finding their light, right?
Mhm.
For having been an entrepreneur, I also, I share faith base and certainly a way of looking at the world is I also want to make sure I'm doing right, for the next kingdom, not just this one. Right.
That's right.
So then in business, we shorthand that to, okay, is this going to do well and do good? Right.
Mhm.
And if we can, then well, then let's just do it. Right. And we'll figure out what we don't know and we'll put our energy in the right place. And those are examples of how I got into this is I'm a tech startup founder and it's very
Yeah.
different now. And in some ways it's not at all.
Yeah, totally. And I actually think you probably get this. I have such a hard time with labels. Like the calling myself X, like I'm this thing. I have a really hard time with it because I think, like you understand, is I think when you have a creative inclination, you just understand that so many different parts of the world overlaps that to call it one thing is kind of like doing it a disservice because it's not just the one thing. Like I'm not just a video guy. I don't just do that. You
Right.
might think of that because I know how to run a camera, but it's like there's so many other layers to that. And so I just made me think about that. I don't know where I was going with that line of thought, but
Well,
I think you understand what I'm saying.
I do, and that touches on another thing that I have always been passionate about, which is what I call the problem with nouns.
Mm,
So you're like, I am a producer. Okay, whatever that means to you. And I have this whole exercise I walk people through about imagining a chair and then drawing that chair and then you being like, wait, that yours doesn't look like mine. Like, isn't that funny? Because when I
mm,
said this, you heard this. All right, let's keep editing and these kind of things.
yeah.
And but think about how that applies to what we're talking about here. If you guys said you were a marketing agency, somebody has a concept in their mind of what that is. May or may not be what you are. If you're like, we're a video production studio, okay, you do video production, right?
Mhm.
But what else? And if you were said, people love, you're saying labels, and I agree, but they love them because they find comfort. But
Sure.
to me, that's actually the biggest miscommunication we see happen, right? Because if you just assume that when you say marketing and I say marketing, we mean the same thing,
Right.
well, the danger there is we've miscommunicated and we don't even know it because we think that we're saying the same thing.
That
So,
so sorry, I'm sorry I interrupted you. I just
no,
want to
you're good.
pull a thread on you saying that. We literally had a meeting yesterday. One of the things that we're packaging with what we're doing now is aimed specifically at some of the pain points that like local franchise owners have. And so we're building an offering to help that audience, right? So we had a meeting with a person who owns some franchises. And in the middle of that discussion, we had that exact conversation. I asked him, we were talking about marketing, and he was talking about, oh, if I got to add video versus all these other things. I said, well, what is marketing to you versus what I think marketing is? Because
Right.
marketing's a giant umbrella term. And so maybe the things that you think are difficult with marketing, we actually can do because it's within the purview of what we know how to do. And so in that conversation, we literally talked about that just yesterday. And so I think it is important. And this is almost like, when you think about two people that debate, I think good debaters talk about defining terms so
Right.
that you have a mutual understanding of what those mean and you're on the same playing field so you're talking about the same thing. And I think that's important to do as you're working with somebody.
Yeah, it's a huge thing and it's a shared language, right? And
Right.
even what you described about how one of the questions you ask people now that you see has really started to move the needle is what does success look like? Or in
Uh-huh.
6 months, what will success look like for you?
Uh-huh.
Already, think of the difference between, opening dialogue, that conversation and thinking it through and getting them to pause and reflect versus going checklist. Okay, cool. What are your KPIs? Got it. What kind of ROI do you need? Got it. Right? What is ROI to them? Maybe they need help framing it. Do they even use KPIs, right? Or whatever their version is. like I've found that the antidote to the misunderstanding of now with the problem with nouns, sentences, right? So even
Mm,
like I mean, one of our more recent companies, like we stopped using the phrase SOPs for standard operating procedures because people thought that meant so many different things. What you
mm,
thought it meant and I thought it meant. Or as Brene Brown says, what does done look like? Like when someone would do one,
yeah,
we did not mean the same thing,
yeah.
right? We got to this is how we do things. This is how we do things with our
Mm,
email signatures. This is how we do things when it's time to bill a client. This is how we do
yep,
things. Our brand guide, right?
yep.
Um, though that sounds silly, when you get to it, like what you just described, like clients sitting there going, "Well, you are you all marketing? Are you a sliver of it?" And you're trying to be
That's
like,
right.
"Well, hey, it's all in the purview of like what's that sentence for you guys? Is it making sure making sure what you guys do helps the people who need it or reaches the people who need it? Like some phrase, right?" And people are like, "Well, that makes sense. That's what you do." Right?
That's yeah,
You know,
exactly. I'm sorry to cut you off again. You're
no, go
saying so
ahead.
much good stuff. I want to take that thread, but just to your point that you just said, we have a client that we've done video for the last couple of years, and we had kept them updated on sort of our like company progress and sort of expanding what we're able to do. And to your point about renaming SOPs to what we do, um, we we are helping them form that as a company because they didn't when it came to their visual representation of who they were and their brand and their value proposition, that was not clear. I mean, the people that are their customers know that, but we're now trying to shed light on that in a more cohesive way with their email signatures, with their brand guide, with the videos, with the website design, like all encompassing. And so like that is what some marketing agencies do, but we're taking it from the way that we approach that is we're not saying, "Hey, we're a marketing agency, let us do XYZ." We want to help you communicate your value proposition. These are the places we think are maybe holding that back that we can help you um, help get better and help get in a
Yeah.
place to actually just accent really what you're good at. And that's how we found a lot of success with some of our current clients, trying to shift them away from not just thinking about us as video, but as more of a holistic creative partner. That's how we're doing that. And we're already starting to see some success. So it's really cool to hear you mention that and just to kind of get more validation that I think what we're doing is actually heading in the right direction.
It totally is. It totally is. And it's also why, sometimes if it hasn't happened already, I'm sure it has. It has to us. Like I'll beat my head against the wall and I'm like, what do you mean you hired a branding agency? What the hell do you
Yeah,
think we're doing here? I didn't
that's right.
pitch it to you as branding,
That's
but we're
right.
figuring out who your people are, the aesthetic, what it needs to feel like, how we're going to talk about it. But people, and so but you're right. Like everything you just described is a really beautiful brand experience design
Right.
process. But it doesn't mean that's the way to explain it to someone, right? And it doesn't mean that's what makes sense for your business, where it is, reputation or relationship you already had.
Mm-hmm.
You guys are, it's from this story, right? It's telling me you're doing a great job of kind of figuring out that no matter how you position yourself, like it's still relative to somebody, right? Relative
That's
to the
right.
listener. And so in this case, that long-term relationship you had with a client, like a different way to talk about it. And that shows the agility you have to have and adaptability you have to have, especially as you evolve.
Yeah, totally. And I think about sort of like, I think core elements that are allowing us to do that with our current clients is trust. I'm sure you've probably read the book Speed of Trust or heard of the book Speed of Trust.
Yeah.
Um, like we try to be very honest with our clients about how we do what we do, why we do what we do. Um, and that builds a level of trust so that when we're saying, "Hey, we think we might need to explore this," I'm not going to tell you I'm going to knock it out of the park, but I'm going to tell you I'm going to give you my best effort with keeping your goals in mind. I think that's a core element of it, of just being successful as you start to move on to doing new things, but just working with clients in general. And then there was another one, but I forgot because while I was thinking about that one, I forgot what I was going to say. But I do know the power of trust and just being honest with people when you're working with them. Oh yeah, and like the core element of just alleviating a problem or alleviating a pain point. Like I think part of the reason why that success story I told you that we're moving to with the company that's worked with us for a while is we're just making their lives easier. Like they don't have to go work with all these other people because we're like spearheading it and then they trust us. And those two things like work hand in hand. And I would think that that would apply to not just what we're doing, but even work in your space. That's even more, even entrepreneur work, like what you're providing
Absolutely.
for a client. Like I think that's kind of a core thread of being successful, probably.
Yeah, I mean, you're describing what is a user experience design principle, but again, I
Mm,
think it's just an experience design principle, and
right.
an experience can be all the way to the conversation you and I are having, right? Like, what's the experience like? It's what we call surprise and delight, right? Every time you're like, huh, that was actually easier than I thought it was going to be.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Did you see that this thing is here now and you just don't even have to touch these buttons and it just does
Yep.
it for you? Like
Yep.
that concept. And so then if you think about that applied to services and professional relationships, I mean, even friendships, like, oh
Hmm.
my gosh, wasn't that so sweet? She just handled that for me. Like,
Yeah.
wow. Like, whenever you have that, like, oh, it was easier than I thought it was going to be. There's a lot of benefit to that.
100%, 100%. Well, I mean, it's funny. I have this whole list of questions, and I think in some way we covered almost all of them just organically. So that's what
Yeah.
I love to hear. But is there anything that you want to talk about what you guys do? Is there anything that you think would be helpful to someone watching this that's maybe like, hey, I have this idea and I need help with it? Like maybe any kind of thoughts for those people?
Yeah, it's a great question. For us, there's a lot of power, I'd say, always in whether it's your own idea or you have a skill set you think you could help a client or a potential business partner or what have you with, taking stock of just like you started, your superpowers and strengths. Like we have some different visual tools we use, which you've seen some of them. Of
Hmm.
if you had to chart yourself on an XY, grid of like really good behind the scenes, keep me in a locked room and give me code, let me
Hmm.
code. To I'm out talking to people all day, hyper extrovert, right? Where do you fall? And
Hmm.
I feel so happy when I can just check off the list, tell me what to do, give me screen caps and instructions, and I am your girl. Versus like, I wonder what the future of a community will look like, right?
Hmm.
Like
Yeah.
fuzzy. Where are you on that? And when we
Yeah.
do that, then you start being like, okay, you can kind of build out some balanced teams, or if you're even hiring outside agency partners, figure
Hmm.
out what are the strengths you have internally and where could you use some support and balance. I mean, all partners and agencies and creatives are not created equally. And I don't
Hmm.
just mean that like some are better than others, right? They're different. And so if
Right.
you're forming even a short term team or a fractional team to work on a project together, who are those pieces and how do we all need to fit together? I think that's a big thing, both for the way you kind of pitch yourself and the way somebody buys services.
Yeah,
Um,
totally. And I think about that from the perspective of even a creative who maybe thinks they need to do it all. It's like not necessarily. It's like
right.
if you can find other people, I mean, to your point, that are more better at this thing than you, and you can bring them into a project, and that collaboration turns into a um, a better outcome for the client. Like explore those opportunities. I think sometimes, and not everybody struggles with that. And I'm blown away. I think at to give Bowling Green, Kentucky some props at just how collaborative we are in bringing things together. I mean, just with that What Could BGB project, I mean, I don't know that that project would have seen the success that it saw if one agency touched it.
Nobody
I
would
do
have.
not believe that. And so I think to the end of the creative, it's like, yeah, you can bring other people into the fold for a project, especially if it's something that you're not as familiar with, and that's okay. And I think companies most of the time don't really care. Like they want it to work, and so like if you can bring in
Right.
other people, then like do it.
Yeah. No, I think you hit the nail on the head. I mean, I don't think our project would have been as successful if we had not had just a huge amount of going, what is everybody's superpower?
Hmm.
Let's have you do that,
Hmm.
right? And did it take more orchestration? Was it different effort? Yes, right? But it got us where we needed to be. And I do think it's taught us a lesson about how we can all work together. And many of you, I mean, I'm new to town, all things considered, right? You guys have been working together for a long time. So, we don't need to take credit like y'all hadn't already been doing that. But
Sure.
I do think there was some bravery on everyone's part, y'all's part, to
100%.
walk into a room to be like, I literally don't know what we're building, but we're going to have to build it. But let's figure
Yeah.
that out together. And there was a lot of really great stuff that happened there that I honestly hope we get to do more of. It shouldn't be weird for you to like pick up the phone and be like, or talk to a client, be like, who could really help with this? We should bring Amanda in, right? Then when I'm like, who needs to get in here, right? And like grab you. That's such a rising tides situation, and it doesn't, especially sort of your smaller shops or solopreneurs, like you don't have to do it all. Like the likelihood that you clear the stuff off your plate that drives you nuts and somebody else is not drained by them, but you are, will actually let you do more of what energizes you, usually makes you more productive in general, right? So it's that you got to find the balance, and sometimes that jump from doing it all yourself to the next step is the hardest,
Hmm.
or at least it seems the hardest at the time. Uh,
Yeah.
but I do think there's a lot of possibility with collaboration, and around here, it's huge. And I guess the other thing too is just the theme of this whole conversation, encouraging everybody from the folks in town who run multi-billion-dollar European Ls to like somebody who's just trying to launch their first Etsy shop, like trying to put any of us in a lane or a box, not because we're rebellious and want to get out of them, but because our strengths go across those lanes as creatives,
Yep.
right? It's really important to see that possibility because there's so many talented people in town who could help you go from idea to thing, or see the real value of your product, service, dream, nonprofit initiative, fill in the blank, come to life.
Mhm.
But if it's just like, well, we'll go to Forerunner for video, and if we're going to start a tech startup, we'll go talk to Amanda, and if we're a big company, we'll talk to Innovation Engine. Like that's not how any of it works, right?
That's right.
It's and I think the more that we can kind of realize that, the faster we're all going to be able to collaborate even more effectively.
100%. Well, that's awesome. I'm glad we ended on that, bringing that home, tying all those things
Yeah,
together. Well done. But
thanks.
thanks for talking with me, and I always appreciate talking to you and hearing your
I
perspective. And
know. Same.
obviously, I keep up to date with everything Innovation Engine's doing, so I can't wait to see what the next project is.
Can't wait to see what you guys have coming. It's going to be exciting. So,
Thanks,
all
I
right. Talk
appreciate
soon,
it.
Andrew. Thanks.
Thanks.